Hello, everyone, and good evening. So this is Ahmed with you, and we will start in a few seconds. All right, so let's wait a few more seconds, and then we can start our seventh session of the Project Management in Practice program. All right, so we can start. So hello, everyone, once again, and welcome to the seventh session. Actually, the program has really passed quite fast, to be honest. All right. So we've had already 6 sessions about the study, the business case, the study phase of the project, identifying stakeholders, building project charter, managing communications, planning, building a schedule, identifying and managing risks in the project. Okay, so those were all really important topics for anyone who would like to start practicing project management as a project manager or as a project team member, or in any different role. Okay. um, and today actually we're going to talk about a very important topic actually, and also in so tonight actually we'll talk about a very important topic that happens in all projects, and it's really quite important and quite problematic, let's say, for some project managers, which is dealing with the changes in the project. Because, and as we said, since we started the program, the actually we're just adopting a generic project management approach, even though in today's session we're going to talk a little bit about how to manage changes in agile, in adaptive project management. Okay, but we're taking a general approach, or just not really a predictive project management approach, even though it's really so close to it. But let's rather call it a generic project management. All right. So we will be talking about how to manage or effectively manage and deal with projects. So in this session, we will, have, as usual, a couple of slides from our PMP course, just some selected slides. And then we'll be looking at the template to use for raising change requests. And then at the end, we'll be looking at some scenarios, all right? Okay, so okay, something now very, very important to start with is actually the change control process in project management, which is called the integrated change control process in the PMBOK. Now, the process of dealing with changes has got a few steps in it, and you need to know them. You really need to know them almost in order. Okay, a couple of steps. It doesn't matter which one comes first, but generally the order will be this way. We'll go in this, in this flow. All right. So generally, when there is a need for a change, and that's because, for example, because of the inaccurate estimates that we have in the planning phase, for example, or in case, for example, we miss some requirements, or if there are any specification changes, or in case the customer has requested, for example, any updates, or if there are any new regulations released and we need to adapt to them, or in case there were any technical dependencies, or we were impacted by the conditions in the market, okay? Or maybe the sponsor, him or herself, they would like to make some changes. So, there are lots and lots of causes for project changes. So, no matter what the change, what the cause is, actually, if there is a need for a change, because actually those causes could impact the baselines, the scope baseline, the schedule baseline, the cost baseline, then definitely we need to have a change request. So here, the project manager generally is the one that creates the change request, even though actually anyone on the project could raise a change request, not just the project manager. Okay, but the preferred way is if the people involved in the project, the stakeholders or the project team members, they go through the project manager in order, to keep it synchronized, to have just one channel of communication of changes to the change control board. Now, once the project manager creates the change request, so the first thing they need to do, the project manager, is to log this change request in the change log, which is a document that contains the list of all the change requests that were raised during the project and what was the status of each one of them. Okay. And once that's done, then the project manager can proceed with submitting or presenting actually the change request to the change control board, CCB. Now I will tell you a little bit now how this is done in practice. Since in my career as a project manager, I have raised probably tons of change requests, okay, to the CCBs of all my waterfall at least projects. Since in Agile we don't have a CCB, so usually when there is a change request, and mainly a significant one, I usually send the information to the steering to the change control board, inform them that there is a change request raised. Usually, we have this weekly, bi-weekly meeting with the change control board. Sometimes it's an ad hoc meeting depending on the need for it. But usually the change control board, they prefer if we gather all the change requests to present them in one meeting, so they don't have to gather more often, since they are really busy people. All right. So then let's suppose I have just one change request. Then we schedule the meeting with the change control board, and then I go ahead and I send them the change request, the template itself, the filled out template of the change request in advance. And then during the meeting, of course, it's my chance. It's either me or a stakeholder or whoever is really engaged in that change request. So the request for the change is presented. We will explain in a while what's the content of the change request, and we'll see the template and with some example in it. Okay, we will explain the change, the impact of the change, what would happen if the change is rejected. Okay, then it's my job to make sure that I really present to them all the potential impacts of the change request. Okay, mainly on the constraints, the time, the cost, the scope. Then, of course, the CCB, which is compound of a number of stakeholders, including the sponsor, sometimes other key stakeholders, can be also PMO, can be somebody probably sometimes representing the customer, not always, but sometimes if it's joint project between us and the customer. Definitely some people from senior management, decision makers, key stakeholders from the project or from the company. They will go through the evaluation of the change, and the potential impact of it. Of course, they will be asking questions, sometimes technical questions. Sometimes as a project manager, I bring in with me, some technical people that are better suited for, explaining or answering the different technical questions. And, once the CCB, they got all the information, they can either request a time to think about it, like, some time alone in the meeting, like, half an hour, 15 minutes, whatever. Or sometimes, they can ask to meet again. But that really doesn't really happen that much, to meet again. Usually they need some time alone in that meeting. It's like in the courtroom, and then, they call us in and they give us their decision. Either they will defer the change request, asking for more information, or they will reject the change request, or they will approve the change request. Okay. Now, whatever decision of the change control board, I definitely, as a project manager, need to update the change log with the decision and also inform the stakeholders about the change request status. Okay, so that's the first thing I do after the decision of the change control board, and then I go ahead, update the baselines. Okay, to reflect this change in the baselines, and that's not really something easy, because updating the baselines requires replanning actually from my team and myself. So we need to take that approved change request into consideration, check how that will or actually just make sure that we update the plan, the new activities, their duration, etc. And actually, we already in the change request, we have presented actually what would be the potential impact. So we just need to reflect that in the baselines, and then we go ahead, implement the change request, okay, implement the request, and then monitor the implementation. So we need to make sure that we really monitor the implementation to check if the change request had given the expected results, improvements or not. Okay, so that's very important. Now, most common change requests in my projects were about, for example, to add add more requirements in the scope, maybe request to extend the timelines, add some budget, maybe sometimes for critical in some critical technical projects, for example, modifying the approved solution or some specifications. Sometimes also, adding some resources. Not always we need change requests for adding resources, but sometimes it can happen. Okay, especially if those resources really are external, or there is a conflict between stakeholders about whether to add resources or not. So we need to go through the CCB to decide, etc., etc. So I just wanted to list here what were the main, change requests raised, for example, in my projects. Of course, I cannot remember everything, but sometimes also we raise change requests to add more reserve, for risks, for example, contingency reserve, etc., etc. So actually, there could be a lot of different reasons, for which I personally have raised a change request. All right. So, of course, the people who will take the PMP exam, they have to know this process by heart, because in the PMP exam there are lots of questions. But this is a practical course, so we will not focus only on the PMP exam. Now, this is a template of the change request. We will see later in a few minutes the template, which I will share with you, and I will leave it in the description of the video once we upload it to YouTube. So usually change request, you put the project name, who requested the change, the date, the request, the change request number, the name of the request, what would you call it? And then, you describe here what's the change about, the change reason, okay, the impact of the change, mainly on the baselines, as we said, the budget, the schedule impact, the cost also, on the scope also, and if it will have any impact on some other initiatives or other projects, okay, or on the goals themselves of the project, okay. What is the proposed action, okay, by the project manager? Do you propose that it's accepted, it's rejected? Because sometimes, for example, it happened to me in my projects that sometimes the customer requested some changes. My team are against those changes. So, but I am buying, I'm obliged to raise that change request, but I put here that, for example, my team does not agree with it, and we really don't agree with it, and we state the reason why. Okay, so it's not like, it's not because I raised the change request that means I am in favor of that change request. Okay, so I raise change request because sometimes I have to, I receive the change request from the customer or from stakeholder, so officially I have to do it. I have to raise it to the CCB, especially if we have this recurring instance of meeting with the CCB, for example, once every 15 days. Okay, so I have to raise all the change requests, but again, I have to put there what my team thinks about it, including myself. Okay, and then what would be the status of the change? Is it in review, approved, or rejected? If it's approved, what was the approved date, and by whom was it approved? Okay, we will go later in example, the template filled out with an example. Okay, but this is the change request template, which you as a project manager will use in your project. And again, this does not apply to Agile. We will talk later a little bit about Agile, how changes happen in Agile. Okay, this is a template, or this is an example of a change log. So actually, you can see that the change log contains the change number. Okay, the type of change. Okay, what does it impact? Is it a scope change? Is it schedule, a technical change, a solution, certain particular or a particular component, for example, a change in what exactly, description of the change. Okay, so are we adding something? Are we removing something? Are we extending the schedule? Are we asking for more money, etc.? Who is requesting? Okay, who requested the change? Okay, so here we list the stakeholder who requested the change, the date submitted, okay, of the change. Okay, when was it submitted or raised, to be honest? then is it approved? If it's approved, then the date approved. Okay. If it's not approved, then that's not applicable. The status of the change: approved, rejected, deferred. Deferred means like we need more research, more evidence, more information. Okay. And, for whatever decision, we need to put there some comments. Okay. If it's approved, then what is the recommended action plan for implementation? If it's rejected, what's the reason for rejecting it? And if it's deferred, then what kind of information this change control board is actually asking, to obtain, further, right? To further obtain. Okay. Now, let me tell you about really, I call it the cancer of project management. Something I call the cancer of project management is in case you as a project manager, you're managing your project, but you have lots and lots of undocumented changes. Okay. Because, sometimes the project manager is so busy, they receive a phone call or an email from the customer or from a stakeholder. And, in that email or in that phone call, there is a request for a change. So the project manager does not take the time, to create the change request, doesn't go through a CCB. Sometimes, it's not the project manager's fault. Sometimes, there is actually no CCB in the project. Okay, let's say it. Okay, sometimes, you get, you manage to gather the key stakeholders, the sponsor, the decision makers, in one or two meetings at the beginning of the project, and then they get suddenly so busy, and you can never get a hold of them or all of them at once, and you need them all. And then even if you get a hold on some of them and you present a change request to them, they try, to avoid the responsibility because, they don't want to be accountable for, any changes that might impact really severely the project. So, and then the project manager will try to find different ways. Sometimes they, adapt to the change without, properly having it approved. And that's really a cancer. It's a cancer of the project, of project management, and it's a cancer on the project, to proceed with a change that has not been approved by the change control board or by the stakeholders, by the sponsor, etc. Okay, so and that could leave you puzzled or dazzled actually, because you lose track of what was originally agreed, what was added, what was removed. You really want to avoid that. You don't want to go through. You don't want to go that path that way. Okay, you don't want to go down that road because once you start having just one change, reflected in the project plan without it being approved, then you will just, you will take it easy with the rest of the requests, and you will just, do it, and then at the end, you end up having, scope creep, scope creep because your scope was expanded without, any control, any change requests. Your project was supposed to last for 1 year. Now it's almost 2 years and it didn't finish. You keep asking for more and more money, for your project. And that's really a nightmare. That's why, a lot of companies, they always doubt what the project managers are doing. And I can tell you guys, I'm a project manager, you're project managers or future project managers. And I can tell you, if you really, want to have control over your projects, you don't want to lose, any momentum in your project. Don't want to lose any control. Really, do it right. Just do it right. Okay. If there is any change that might impact your baselines, raise a change request. If no one's there to approve your change request, escalate to the sponsor. Okay. Because the only one who cannot disappear from the project is actually the sponsor. Okay. Now, stakeholders could change interest, in the project. They could, be busy. They could, not follow the engagement plan, but not the sponsor. Okay, so once you escalate to the sponsor, then it's his or her role to ensure that there is a proper change request process in place and that all changes go through the necessary approvals. All right. So that's really important for you to remember. So please avoid this cancer. Don't let it, enter your project. Don't let it spread in your project because, that can create a lot of frustration, not just for you or for the sponsor, but also frustration for the team, for the sponsors, for the stakeholders, because some of them will see that this project is actually never ending, and if you do it right, you will always prove that actually you're on top of your project. You're a very well organized project manager. You can do it right. Okay, so that's why I recommend that really you do it right. Okay, avoid this cancer. Don't let it penetrate into your project. Okay. Okay, so actually, let's go ahead now and let's have a look at a change request form. Actually, you can find this online. As I said, just Google it, you can find it. Okay, so this is a template of a change request form. So here we have a sample project. For example, we have a project to deploy solar panels, across the city. All right, or yeah, in different cities. We call the project Solar Panels Deployment VX1. That's the name of the product. Actually, so here the change request number, so 0011. Now the change name. So what's this? What's the name of this change? So the name should, help the stakeholders get a hint on what's this change about. So for example, here the solar panel product version 3.2. So actually, from the name of it, seems like we're adding some features to the product that we're working on. So this will help the stakeholders have an idea on what are we requesting here, okay? Now, what's the date of the request? For example, it's 11th of November. Today's date, 2024, for example. Requested by the project manager. Let's suppose her name is Lara Garcia. That's her email address. And then, these are the change details. And here, Lara will put the urgency of the change. Is it a low priority change? Is it a medium priority change? And is it a high priority change? This is what we used to do in our projects, guys. Okay, so actually, all what you see here, that's what you apply, in your projects. Then you go ahead as a project manager and you provide a description of the change. So, for example, we would like to increase the efficiency rating of our residential solar panels from 20% to 25% through the development of version 3.2. Okay, so this version 3.2, since it's about adding two more features, okay, here, all right. So we're describing the change. What's the reason for the change here? Okay, so the market research shows an increasing demand among residential customers for more efficient solar panels. So we have customers who are looking for more efficient solution. So here, increasing our efficiency rating definitely will keep us competitive and show that we are innovative compared to our competitors. Okay, so now that's the reason for the change. I'm trying, to really highlight the importance of this change to the stakeholders, to the change control board, since I'm indicating this change as high. So it's either me indicating it or actually the requester who is indicating it. All right. Okay, now here I'm going to provide insights on the change impacts. Okay, so please pay attention to this. Now, first of all, let's discuss what is the impact of the change on the scope. Now, here we're adding two more functionalities and I'm attaching an annex. And, for example, I put here, see the annex. So then you'll understand as a CCB what are these two functionalities that we're adding, their description, their specifications, any more details, etc., etc. Okay, so I'm attaching that in an annex. All right, the impact on deliverables. So actually, the enhanced product version 3.2. So here, what we will be delivering an enhanced product version 3.2 with updated user guide or user manual, for example. Okay, so that's the impact on the deliverables. Okay, maybe I can put their user guide version, for example, 1.5, just as an example, right? The impact on the cost. So actually here I'm stating that based on our analysis on this, these two additional functionalities, we will need a budget increase by $10,000. Okay, and that additional budget will be used for additional research, development, and testing of these two new features. All right. Now, what's the impact of the change on the resources? Okay. Again, this is just an example, guys. All right. So just to give you some guidance. All right. Now, on the resources, we will require 2 additional technicians, and the employees also will need the training concerning the product change. Okay, so I'm specifying. I can even go further into details, but just I'm keeping it short because it's just a short session, so I don't want to really add lots of details. The impact on the timeline, we will extend the timeline by 3 weeks, okay, to account for any additional testing phases, marketing material adjustments, etc. So here so far, I have listed the impact of the change on the scope, on the deliverables, on the cost, on the resources, on the timeline, and this is really what the stakeholders, what the CCB would like to see, and they like to see numbers. Okay, so you don't say just we will these will might have an impact on the schedule. You don't say that. You have to be precise. Okay, how much impact will that be? All right, because then the CCB will need to decide on precise data, exact data. All right. Now, what's the impact on the stakeholders? Here we went a little further with the description. So this change will have a positive impact on the customers, actually, because they will benefit from the product's improvements. All right. Also, it will have a positive impact on the stakeholders because it will enhance the company's competitive edge, and potentially lead to increased market share and revenue by 5%. You see, I've put here a percentage by how much will we increase our market share, because CCB is very interested in numbers, okay, in details. You have to be precise. You have to convince them in case you really would like this change to be approved, all right? It will have also a mixed impact on employees because some teams may face an increased workload. So you see here I'm sort of highlighting some potential risk, all right? But at least I'm highlighting all the possible impacts of this change in here. But one of the most important sections here, when describing the potential change impacts, is the impact if not approved. Now, this is something we usually do as project managers, okay? So in case we really think that this change is quite important and we want to draw to the attention of the CCB, what would happen if this change request is rejected. So here we've added, in case the change request is not approved, then our product might lose competitive advantage in the market, and we not and because the competition is very tight, and also our team morale might be impacted because actually they really thought hard of these 2 new functionalities. They would like to have them. Of course, as a project manager, I'll be saying all this in the meeting. So our team is really interested in having these functionalities. They will give us big advantage, compared to our competitors. So, if we will not do them, then our team might think that actually we're working on a version of this product that may not be competitive enough in the market, and therefore we will not achieve the targeted date numbers. Okay, and then our team might lose motivation. Okay, so I need to highlight all this in the meeting with the change control board. Okay, also an important section of this change request is risk analysis. Now, lots of project managers forget about this section, but actually risk analysis is really quite important, okay? You need to define what's the potential impact of this change, okay? Now, we have identified one potential risk, which is there might be delay with the design of the new model due to visa restrictions on employees coming from XXX country, okay? We don't mention any countries here, so not to have any troubles. All right. However, we estimated the probability of this risk as low. Okay, so that's not really a high risk. Okay. However, we're proposing a mitigation strategy. Okay, in order to mitigate or mitigate the probable impact or probability of this risk. So here we will continue working with our on-site resources, okay, and also integrate online activities with our remote resources from this XXX country, because seems like our main designers are from this country, okay, in order to mitigate the impact. Okay, so actually here we've identified a potential risk, but also at the same time we're proposing some mitigation plan, even though this risk is low. And you probably remember from the last session we had about risk management, we don't really prepare a mitigation strategy for low risks. But again, this is just an example, and we still, even though it's a low risk, we still wanted to provide, a mitigation strategy to show that we really are on top of this change. We know what it is about, what are the potential impacts, including risks, and we are actually ready. So we're not just, requesting a change and then we say, okay, we'll figure out later, what to do with it, or in case, we encounter some risks, or actually, yeah, and then, we start running around trying to deal with them. No, actually, we need to prove to the CCB that we are in control. That's usually what stakeholders, key decision makers would like to see. And then, of course, we need to know the decision on this change request, okay? So actually here we need to know the decision, if it's going to be accepted, if it's going to be rejected, or more information are requested. Here we put the sponsor name, and the date of the signature, for example, and who decided on this change. So here, for example, Wanda Wright, okay? Wanda Wright actually is the one who decides on this change request because she's the head of product development, right? And we put here, for example, the date of her approval, okay? So actually, once you present this change request, it should contain all the necessary information. You don't want to have the CCB asking you too many questions. All the information here should suffice in order to provide them with whatever they need in order to decide, okay? Of course, you can bring in anyone you need with you to the meeting in order to convince the CCB. Now, what I will do is, as usual, I will leave this change request form for you, in the video description once we upload it to YouTube. And now let's have a look at some scenarios, okay? These scenarios are taken from, our PMP training to help our students, prepare for the PMP exam in matters related to change management. Actually, we've removed all the possible answers. We're just, going to mention the scenario and what's the best course of action to do, and we will be explaining these course of actions, okay? Now, for example, in this scenario, we have a project manager who is managing a project using the predictive approach. Predictive approach is waterfall approach. Therefore, a change control board CCB is formed, in which the project sponsor, of course, is a member, to review all change requests. Now, 1 month after the project launch, the CCB received 3 change requests, okay? The first one by the sponsor, the second one was by a low power stakeholder, and the third one was issued by a senior team member. Now, which of these individuals is not allowed to submit a change request? Now, of course, as I mentioned earlier, anyone involved in the project, from stakeholders list, from project team, actually they're allowed to submit a change request, okay? As I said earlier, we prefer if all the change requests go through the project manager, okay, just to have one channel of communication. But it's fine if they raise the change request themselves, because at the end the change control board will inform the project manager of the received change requests and of their decision. Let's have another scenario. A project manager got the approval to carry out a significant change that would bring added value to the project. The change has a total cost of $10,000 and will add 1 month to the project's duration. What should the project manager do right after getting the change approved? Okay, now, of course, here, it's a significant change. It will bring added value to the project, and it's approved, okay? So the change request was approved. So actually, almost at the end of the process. Now, for this question, we're here. You see? No, actually, we're here. So actually, we're right here. Now, what needs to be done next? Okay, update the change log, inform the stakeholders, update the baselines, and implement the change. So whatever you choose, that's right. Okay, so what should the project manager do right after getting the change approved? Here, we've put update the baselines, the time, cost, and scope baselines to reflect the change and work with the team on implementing it. Okay, of course, again, as I said, this was a question. Of course, the questions in the PMP exam, they don't always list all the actions. They just list one action from the entire process, and each time in the PMP exam they can list just an action from the whole 8 steps of the change management process in the project in waterfall. And you need always to figure out, okay, now if the question asks me what to do next, then I need to figure out where am I exactly in the project. Okay, let's have a look at another scenario. Now let's get back to this. Now, some of you might wonder why the answer did not start with updating the change log and informing the stakeholders. It was not mentioned in the question. It just mentioned this answer among other answers which were wrong. Okay, so I remember one of the answers was discuss with the CCB. You don't discuss with the CCB. You already got the approval. So actually, you're past the discussion with the CCB. Let's have a look at another scenario. During project execution, a key team member has to be moved to another critical project for the company. Currently, there is no other team member who can fill that role. What should the project manager do first? Now, if a key team member to my project has to be moved to another critical project, that means actually I'm not in a projectized organization. I'm more in a weak matrix, maybe functional organization, which means, in this case, I need to evaluate the impact of the removal of this key team member. Okay. I need to prepare my alternatives. And then, because I am in a weak matrix organization or in a functional organization, for this kind of change, I definitely need to submit a change request, okay? Because here I'm not in control, okay? Actually, it is the functional manager who is in control, okay? So I will have to go through a change request in order to replace this key team member, okay? So that's one of the scenarios where for replacing a team member, we will need to raise a change request. Okay, let's have another scenario. A company recently used desktop research for a feasibility study, which showed that the project is behind schedule. The project team also has concerns about the impact of the scope changes on the project schedule. All right. So here we have a project behind schedule, and we have concerns that there might be an impact on of the scope changes on the project schedule as well. Now, what should the project manager do to keep the project on schedule while still meeting project objectives? Okay, so we really want to work hard towards achieving the objectives, and at the same time keep the project on schedule. So here the project manager will need to collaborate closely with the change control board on any scope changes. Okay, since we might have scope impact on scope. Okay, have approved change requests, and through those approved change requests, we will need to update the schedule baseline accordingly. All right. Of course, if we would like to keep the project on schedule, then here you definitely might want to consider some alternatives such as fast tracking, maybe crashing if that's permitted, etc. Okay, let's have a look at another scenario. Now here the project manager is managing a project with a distributed team, fixed budget. It always happens in projects to have a fixed budget almost and a tight deadlines. That's always the case in most projects. Now, knowing that they're adopting a predictive approach, what should the project manager do to avoid any scope creep and keep their team focused on delivering a product that meets requirements? Now, if we really would like to avoid scope creep, the most efficient way is perform or apply the integrated change control. Okay, so here we need to ensure that all changes, all alterations to the scope, they must go through the authorized formal change management process. Okay, so this way we can avoid the scope creep, keep the team focused, and deliver, what is being expected. Okay, let's have one more scenario. A project manager presented the project schedule to the stakeholders. They have requested that the project be completed 2 months earlier than the scheduled date. Now, we're past the planning, so we are just finishing the planning phase. We've presented the schedule to the stakeholders, and they requested that the project should be completed 2 months earlier. Now, what should the project manager do here? So in order to fulfill the request from the stakeholders, we need to have a meeting with them and adjust the timelines and also the scope expectations, because shortening the schedule by 2 months, that's actually quite significant amount of time, and we need to assess the impact on the scope and also see how we can align the timelines. Are we removing some items from the scope? Are we adding more resources? Are we adjusting the whole project objectives, etc. Okay, so that requires a meeting and a formal change request. Okay, let's have one more scenario. So here we have a project manager who is in charge of a software development project that follows an agile approach. And as we have mentioned at the beginning of this session, we will be looking at some, agile approach, some, on the way how to implement changes in agile. Okay, during the project execution, the project manager receives a request from the customer to alter a requirement. Okay, what should the project manager do? Simply welcome the change request. Now, how are changes made in Agile? It's very easy. Once there is a request for a change from a stakeholder, from the customer, or some users, usually the product owner or the project manager, they receive this change request. They log it in the product backlog or the project backlog, and then understand the priority of this change, and then make the usual analysis, the usual impact analysis. Now, just being in Agile, in adaptive project management, where we are based on the four Agile values, the four values in the Agile manifesto, and the fourth one is welcoming changes, adapting the changes. Okay, that does not mean that we don't assess the impact of change requests. Yeah, no, actually we do. Even if that's in Agile, yeah, definitely we need to know what's the impact of any change request on the project budget, on the expectations, on the overall release plan, etc. Okay, now definitely we don't have a detailed project plan in Agile, but still we need to assess any potential impacts. Okay, even in Agile, yes, yeah, it happens even in Agile actually. Okay, because it happened a lot of times in Agile projects. The customer was angry because, for example, we did not complete the product, on time as per the release plan. Okay. And, they did not take into consideration the impact of all the changes. They thought just because Agile welcomes changes, yeah, it's true. In Agile, we don't have a change control board. Changes are not raised in the official way as in the predictive project management. So no change request template. Usually the changes in Agile, the customer just, calls the product owner, explains the change. The product owner will tell them, what, send me an email, because, phone call, that's not counted. Send me an email, please, with these details, and I will take them into consideration. Now, the customer sends the email, the product owner logs them in the product backlog, and then, the rest is done as we described with the analysis of the impact, the prioritization, defining the value of the change, etc., etc. It has to go that way, but, just because we're in Agile and, we just implement changes, back and forth, in and out, no, that does not happen that way. There must be a minimum of management, okay, a minimum of analysis. Yes, even in Agile. So definitely we welcome change requests even late in the project in Agile, but still there must be, a mechanism, sort of a no, I wouldn't call it process because we avoid the word process in Agile, but something, some clear steps on what to do in case a change request is raised. Now, another point to raise to your awareness is that generally, for example, in Scrum, we cannot really accept change requests in the middle of a sprint because usually the team is sprinting. So actually, the whole scope of the sprint is frozen. So no changes to the plan of the sprint because the team is sprinting. So we cannot just ask them to stop sprinting and let's discuss a change. So if somebody is sprinting, we cannot stop them because they are working on their pace, on their velocity. Okay. But usually the change request is received by the product owner or the project manager, and then they do what we mentioned earlier. And the review meeting, the change, if the change will be implemented in the next iteration, then that's brought up at the end of the review meeting, and then that will be taken in details in the planning meeting of the next iteration. Okay, so that's usually how changes are handled. Of course, I know a lot of people would disagree and they say, "Oh, actually, we wish if that could be, the case in our projects. Usually, the customer calls us; they're quite, in a hurry. They ask us to implement the change immediately, even in the middle of the sprint. So oftentimes we find ourselves, interrupted. That really impacts the team, that impacts the velocity of the team. And here comes the role of the scrum master slash project manager or coach. Okay, they need to defend the team, make sure they really, keep their pace, keep sprinting without any interruptions. The scrum master or the agile coach must ensure that everybody understands the impact of interrupting the team in the middle of the sprint. Okay, and that any changes will have to go really to the next iteration unless if we apply a more advanced way of agility. For example, let's take an example, and I described this a few years ago in some of my videos on YouTube, which I called advanced scrum. For example, if you have a 4 week sprint, and usually 4 week sprint a month, that's a kind of long period, so what we did, as a solution in order to accept changes easily, even in the sprint without, waiting for the next sprint, the month after. So, we decided that the sprint itself, we will have three or four planning meetings. So for each week, we'll have a separate planning meeting of 2 hours. So actually, for 2 hours, we plan for the work we will do in that first week. And then if we are in that first week and the customer asks for any changes to be added to the sprint, then yeah, we accept that because actually the next week, and the next week we will start with a 2 hour planning meeting. And this way, actually, we're capable of accepting changes because in the entire for the sprint, we will have 4 planning meetings. All right. Each meeting of 2 hours, and then you might be saying, okay, that means 4 sprints inside one sprint. No, actually, because we will have only one review meeting at the end and one retrospective meeting at the end. So that's actually not 4 sprints. That's just one sprint. Okay, but just with 4 planning meetings. So instead of having an 8 hour planning meeting for the entire sprint and then freeze it, now we will be having 4 planning meetings of 2 hours each at the beginning of each week to ensure more flexibility because we know that sometimes customers and stakeholders they cannot wait until the next sprint in order to have us work on their requirements or their changes. Okay, so that was a way how we figured adding some double agility to the sprints. But that's unusual and common, and that's not really counted in the PMP exam, right? Let's look at one more scenario. So during the execution of a project within an operations function, the project manager encounters a scope changes and a delay in the delivery of critical tasks. Okay, how should the project manager address this situation? Now we have scope changes and delay in the delivery. Now, what the project manager needs to do here is definitely analyze with the team the situation, the potential impacts, then start a change request, have and the request of course is to modify the scope and adjust the timelines, raise it to the CCB, and push for an approval. All right. Okay, and yeah, and that's it. Actually, next week we will have the last session in this project management practice. We will learn how to measure performance. So actually, this was it for today's session on how to manage changes in project management generally. Actually, so we talked about predictive. We talked about a little bit about agile. We will be sharing with you, of course, this video, the template which we have used today. And thank you very much everyone for joining. We will be meeting next week in the last session of this practical project management, and it will be about measuring performance in the project. Thank you everyone. It's been a pleasure, and see you next week.